So today's lesson is taken from Luke chapter 6, verses 6 to 11. Luke chapter 6, verses 6 to 11. Starting at verse 6. And it happened on another Sabbath also that he entered the synagogue and taught. And a man was there whose right hand was withered. So the scribes and the Pharisees watched him closely, whether he would heal on the Sabbath, that they might find an accusation against him. But he knew their thoughts and said to the man who had the withered hand, Arise and stand here. And he arose and stood. Then Jesus said to them, I ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy? And when he had looked around at them all, he said to the man, Stretch out your hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. But they were filled with rage and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. All this happened on the Sabbath day, being Saturday, yesterday. I want you to know, church, that God still works miracles on the Sabbath. Yesterday, my wife and I watched our miracle come through on the Sabbath. So this is a very important lesson. Now, it says in verse 6, now it happened on another Sabbath. So whatever happened on this Sabbath, it was similar to what happened on a previous Sabbath. And as we remember from last week's lesson, Jesus had an altercation with the Pharisees. So we know in this lesson he's going to have another one. So this lesson is similar to last week's lesson. So there was some controversy that Jesus gets into, and he gets into it on the Sabbath. Now, as we study the controversies that Jesus faced on the Sabbath day, I think it's important for us as Christians to understand why we come together on a Sunday as opposed to Saturday, the Sabbath. The Saturday is traditionally and historically the Sabbath day, which was the seventh and final day of the week. And it was a day of rest, reflection, and rejoicing based on God's example of resting on the sixth day after he created the world. Now, God always provides a symbol to go along with every covenant that he makes. And he does that so that we can remember the promise, the covenant that he gave us. For example, God gave a rainbow to Noah. You see the rainbow? You remember God's promise. God gave Abraham circumcision. And God gave the Sabbath to Israel as a sign of the Mosaic covenant. The promise was going to come through Moses. Therefore, the Sabbath is a sign of the agreement between God and Israel. When we look at Exodus chapter 31, verses 12 to 13, it says, And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, Surely my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generation, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 12, it says, Moreover, I also gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between them and me, that they may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them. So we no longer are bound by the laws of Moses, the Mosaic covenant. We are no longer living under that covenant because we are now living under a new covenant established through the blood of Jesus Christ. And the sign of this new covenant is communion. If I'm not mistaken, last week we did have communion, right? That's the sign of the new covenant. The communion is also known as the Lord's Supper. And this is the main reason why we observe Sunday as opposed to Saturday now. Why we no longer observe the Sabbath is because of this new covenant. It's believed that people gathered together and worshipped on a Sunday because Jesus Christ rose on that day. The Sabbath is always on a Saturday. However, God gave us a new day. So God did not change the Sabbath because it's in his word, but the Sabbath cannot be changed. It's a covenant. But what God did do, he gave us a new day called the Lord's Day. And that's the day we gather to worship, the first day of the week. Now, in the book of Acts, we see that the early Christians met on the Lord's Day, which is a Sunday, first day of the week. And they did this to celebrate the Lord's resurrection while they're waiting also for his eventual return. Furthermore, Paul instructed the Christians in the church to take an offering on the first day of the week, Sunday, when they met for church. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1 and 2. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given orders to the church of Galatia, so you must do also. On the first day of the week, let each one of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper. In Revelations chapter 1, verse 10, when Apostle Paul was on an island called Patmos, he's greeting the 7 churches, and he received the revelation of end times, and it was on the Lord's Day. The point I'm making, us gathering together on the Lord's Day, on a Sunday, is a very important event for meeting people's needs. The Word of God, it goes on to say, also, he entered the synagogue and taught. This is the reason why Jesus enters the synagogue. He goes into church in order to teach. Now, this event, the background to this event is no different to the previous one, where there was a debate between Jesus and the Pharisees about what constitutes work. What can you do on the Sabbath and what you're not allowed to do on the Sabbath. Now, the Pharisees, they had their ideas of what could be done on the Sabbath. Jesus disagreed with them. And here, Jesus is giving them a chance for them to learn the errors of their ways and receive forgiveness. He's giving them a chance for them to say, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. But they don't do that because of their stubborn hearts. Here, they're showing the stubbornness of their hearts, wrong and strong. There is no strength in being strong, no strength in being wrong. When you're wrong, you're just dead wrong, as the saying goes. But when you're right, there is strength in being right. Even if you've done an injustice, when you are right, there is always strength in being right. Because you could fight your case all the way to the Supreme Courts. If an injustice has been done to you and you're in your right, sooner or later it will come to light. And there are recompense. But when you're wrong, you're just wrong. The Pharisees here are wrong, but they are unwilling to admit it. Now, it's unclear when this event took place, where or when, but what is clear, within this gathering, there is a man with a need. Now, the scenario, it raises questions whether Jesus should have healed the man on the Sabbath. Why not wait until the next day to heal him? Thus, he could have obeyed the laws of the Pharisees. The rules that the Pharisees laid down, Jesus could have obeyed it just by waiting one more day to heal this man. Why not do so? I want you to consider this. You come to church for your healing, for your miracle, but you can't get your miracle because man says so. Man put rules in place so that God cannot give you your miracle. That has got to be wrong. God, who created the Sabbath, God, who gives all miracles, cannot act because a human being says that he can't. That is just simply wrong. That's what's happening here. Verse 7. So the scribes and the Pharisees watched him closely, whether he would heal on the Sabbath, that they might find an accusation against him. Why do you come to church? Not everybody comes to church to be taught. Jesus went to church to teach, but not everybody comes to church to be taught. The Pharisees were clearly here not to be taught by Jesus, but rather to provoke him, to find fault in his teaching, to criticize him, no doubt. Some even speculate that the Pharisees arranged for this man to be here to test Jesus, just to see if Jesus is going to go against the rules that they laid down. It's clear that the Pharisees weren't concerned about this man's well-being. They were only concerned about their own authority and their reputation. Luke's account, it shows the growing resistance to Jesus and his disciples. And still, Jesus continually goes to the synagogue. Continually, he goes to church, demonstrating the importance of not forsaking the gathering together of God's people. Why do you come to church? Not everybody comes to church for the same reason. Verses 8 and 9. But he knew their faults and said to the man who had the withered hand, Arise and stand here. And he arose and stood. Then Jesus said to them, I will ask you one thing, just the one. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy? Jesus' word in here is very powerful. If you have power to do good today and you leave it until tomorrow, what Jesus is saying is that is just evil. You're letting that person wait. You're keeping that person hanging. Regardless how urgent the need is, this man could have been healed the next day, but Jesus chose to heal him there and then. He chose to take advantage of the situation while he had it. The Pharisees here are doing evil because human need is more important than religious tradition. God's truth is more important than our interpretation of it. Not doing good can be like doing evil. Just keeping quiet, turning a blind eye, pretending you didn't see anything. Having a relationship with God is more important than following rituals. In this passage, Jesus uses a questioning technique to teach those who will not be taught. And by phrasing the questioning in the way he does, it reveals that there is no neutral ground when it comes to helping people. We only have two choices. He asked the Pharisees what activities are permitted on the Sabbath day. And according to their understanding, there wasn't a lot you could do. However, Jesus highlights that inactivity can also be harmful. By neglecting to save life, you can contribute to its destruction. Hence, Jesus emphasizes the importance of helping others, helping people in need, even if it's on the Sabbath day. Now, German citizens during World War II tried to stay away from all the conflict, all the mess. They did not want to get involved with what was happening, so they remained quiet. So for those people who did not stand up and support the Jews, those people who did not speak out against what was happening, they themselves contributed to the Jews' downfall, to what was taking place. They helped the Nazis simply by keeping quiet. In New York, a woman was beaten on the street for half an hour. Half an hour she screamed out, and nobody came to her rescue. Furthermore, nobody phoned the police. Those people who kept quiet, who did not intervene, who did not phone the police, they are just as guilty as the person who done the beating. I remember a time I went round the corner from my mum's house in London, England, going to the shop, and I witnessed a woman being beaten on the street. Right in the middle of the road, cars going by, and she's there being beaten. And it shocked me, it frightened me. I never seen nothing like it, and I wanted to. I was young, the guy was big, but I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But that fear stopped me, and I crossed the road and walked past, and I said to myself, this is how I justified it. I said to myself, it's a domestic dispute. They will sort it out. When there's domestic disputes, we can have murder. When you see an opportunity to do good and you don't do it, it's just like doing evil. You participate in the downfall. So Jesus is making this clear in this church service. But we only have two options, and our option is to do good or to do evil. There is no neutral ground. If we are inactive, we are indirectly supporting evil. Moreover, there is no evidence that this man with the withered hand, that it was in need of urgent attendance. In need of urgent attendance. He had a withered hand. He's used to having a withered hand. Is withered today, is going to be the same tomorrow. There is no reason why Jesus couldn't leave it until tomorrow. There's no reason why he had to act there and then. It was not a life-threatening situation. Therefore, Jesus could have left the healing until the next day. This man had a need, yes, but it was a kind of need that required a miracle. Whether the miracle is done today or tomorrow, it makes no difference. Now, how does this situation apply to me and the people I encounter when I go about my daily business? The people have needs around me. How does this apply to me? I want us to recognize that Jesus did not heal every person in Israel. He healed some, what we read about in Scripture, but he did not heal every. Some people he did not heal. Some areas he did not go into. We have no record of Jesus giving money to beggars. We often talk about giving. We have no record that Jesus did this. A lot of Jesus' encounters were one-time events. Jesus came along, touched a person, ministered to their needs. But after Jesus went, they perhaps had another need the following day, or the following week, the following month. But Jesus wasn't around to help them. See, Jesus can't be there all the time. So this is not about burdening ourselves with the responsibility of meeting every person's need, because not even Jesus attempted to do that. But what we can do, we must do. The fact is that many churches drift away from Jesus because they focus too much on people's perception, their perceptions of their needs. And when we do that as a church, our focus is mainly on the perception of people's needs as opposed to what God thinks their needs are, or God knows their needs to be. Often people think that their primary need is money. And throwing money after a problem continually does not equate to doing good. We can continually throw money at a problem, but it does not mean we're doing good. I know of a person who has a drug problem, and the parent facilitate by giving money. Now, when this person has their drugs, they're calm, they're collected, but when they don't have their drugs, they're a different person. So the parent facilitates by handing money, because the parent thinks she's doing a good thing. But this person is not getting over the habit. So keep throwing money at a problem does not equate to doing good. And our perception of our needs can be at odds with what God thinks or knows our needs to be. What God says our needs to be can look totally different to what we think our needs are. So a church, in the name of meeting people's needs, can end up encouraging sinful behavior, distorting God's truth, and not sharing the gospel. This can ultimately leave the individual in a worse position than he was before. And this is exactly what's happening here. The Pharisees are making the Jewish life burdensome because of all the rules and regulations they put in place. Now, the solution to all of this is simply for people to acknowledge their sin, which the Pharisees would not do, acknowledge their sin, ask for forgiveness, turn their lives over to Jesus, and strive to live a life that's pleasing before him as one of his followers. Let me apply this scenario just to bring things into context. Occasionally, people come to our church on a Sunday and they ask for money. Now, in order to be fair, I would tell them that I would consider their request on Monday when the church office is open. So they come to church on a Sunday expecting to go home with money, but I would defer it and say I would consider your request on the Monday when the church office is open. And on the Monday, after considering their requests, if they are successful, they will receive a gift card. Not money, a gift card. And we do that to protect ourselves. These are the rules we put in place to protect ourselves. What we try to do here at Calvary Chapel West, we try to protect ourselves from people coming to church with lies and evil intent. So we don't just give out money when they turn up on a Sunday. We give ourselves time to think about it, pray about it, analyze it, and then we act. Now, I wonder, what would Jesus think of this? What would Jesus say to me? People come to church on a Sunday, they have needs, like this man come to church with a need, and I defer that need until the next day. What would Jesus think about that? Now, I do this to make sure that the need is genuine. Now, in this case, there's no doubt this person had a genuine need. Now, I want you to know, Calvary Chapel West, there have been times when people come to church on a Sunday and we have supplied their needs, not gift cards, but with money, even though we have these rules and processes in place. What I'm saying is, it's just a guide. As a church, we also override our own rules and regulations, our own processes when the need arises, if it's that important. So we are not submitted to our rules and regulations. We are more powerful than our own rules and regulations. We have the right to override our own rules and regulations when the need arises. So there's no reason why the Pharisees here could not override their own rules and regulations to make sure that this man could be healed on the day that he came in. This passage here, it reminds us that we must be aware of the needs around us as we travel along, as we go through church service, as we fellowship. We need to be aware of the needs around us, and we need to ask ourselves, do a self-evaluation, ask ourselves why we meet or do not meet these needs. Why are some needs we meet and others we don't? Now, there may be genuine reasons why we don't meet people's needs. For instance, they may not meet our values. We have certain values. Their needs doesn't match our values or our capabilities. Perhaps we can't supply the needs because we just don't have it to supply. We just cannot do it. Our capabilities. But if the reason why we don't do it is because we are self-centered, or because we are lazy, now that's a problem. So I encourage you all, Calvary Chapel West, to self-evaluate and ask yourself why you do or you don't meet some people's needs. And when these needs arise, seek the Lord for guidance so that we can meet the needs of the people in our community this week. Verse 10. And when he had looked around them all, so Jesus, he's in the temple here, in the synagogue, and he looks around at them all. And I want us to understand that a day is coming when Jesus is going to look at us too. He's going to look around all of us like he looked around all of them. And when Jesus does that, and he looks at us, are we able to look him back in the eye? When he looks at us, what would he see? Will he look at us and think, well done, thou good and faithful servant? Have you done everything that you can do to help others? Have you done everything that you can do to meet people's needs? Have you done the best that you can do with what God supplied you with? your time, your money, your skills. I know that I haven't. I'm a pastor and I know I haven't. If I was to die today, I do not think the Lord will look upon me and say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. But I'm trying. I'm trying to get there. This morning I came to church. And we was outside. And I said to my wife, wouldn't it be something if we moved to having 2 services on a Sunday? I can barely cope with one. And I don't know why that came in my thought, but I said, wouldn't that be something? And I said to her, we could have one service here and another service somewhere else. And I said, the good thing about that, I can have one message and I just teach it in 2 different places. I don't have to do 2 messages. And I don't know where the Lord is taking me with this. But I was thinking to myself, I don't have time to do that, meeting all these needs. But yeah, I'm thinking about it. I do not do the best that the Lord gives me. I do not do the best with what the Lord gives me, but I'm trying. And that's the point. When we see the need and we're able to do, we act. But this was a different situation here. This man had a need, and they were preventing him from having his needs met. How can we live with ourselves knowing that we haven't done the best that we can do? 1 John chapter 2, verse 28, it says, and now little children, abide with him, that when he appears, we may have confidence and not be ashamed before him at his coming. Abiding with Jesus is how we live a life that is pleasing to God. Simply abide with him. You do the best that you can do at the time. You abide. You hang in there. Things may not go according to plan, but you hang in there. The same old, same old. You continue. You continue. You see, what we're gathering here is that church is about everybody taking an active role, which was not happening here. The Lord looked at them all because not everybody was taking an active role. When he asked the questions, who answered? You got a church full of people who answered, who participated. Back to the story about Germany. People have a voice. They could have said yes or no, but they remained to keep silent. Us as Christians, we have a choice too. We can be on this side of the fence or on that side of the fence. There's no neutral ground in between. We all have a voice. We all have a choice. What can we do to be active within our church, within our fellowship? Abiding with Christ, getting involved, continue pushing, do the little that you can do. But here in Luke chapter 6, Jesus looked at them all, probably with disappointment, maybe with anger in his eyes. And then he answered his question. And he shows the Pharisees exactly what God would do on the Sabbath day. He goes on to say, he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. When Jesus commanded the man to stretch forth his hand, Jesus was telling him to do something that was impossible for him to do. Many times when we're meeting people's needs, we consider it to be impossible. Therefore, we don't act. This man has a withered hand. And Jesus asks him to stretch forward the withered hand. As far as the man concerned, this is impossible. I can't do it. I've never been able to do it. But Jesus, he gives the command and he gives the ability for it to be done. The man stretched forth his hand in faith. He applies himself and God fulfills his role. It's amazing what can happen when you try. It is utterly amazing. I watched a video this week with a senior person learning to swim. And the instructor at the end of the video, he said, you're never too old to learn a new skill. And I like that. I said, I'm going to use that. You're never too old to learn a new skill, no matter what it may be. Some of you may want to do ministries in other fields or whatever, and it looks impossible. For this man to stretch his hand forward, it was impossible. But he did so. And he got his miracle. Now, many scholars, they debated whether Jesus broke the Sabbath laws. Now, almost all of them agreed that he broke the Sabbath laws according to the Pharisees. But he did not break the Sabbath law according to God. He did not break the Sabbath law according to God. The Pharisees, they believed you could do work to save life on the Sabbath. But you couldn't do work if the man's need was not urgent, if it wasn't life-threatening, it was a minor illness or something. You needed to leave it until the next day. Any ailment what wasn't life-threatening, you could not deal with that ailment on the Sabbath day. But Jesus did. Jesus showed them exactly what God would do. God would not let the opportunity pass. Now they argue also that Jesus probably did not break the Sabbath because he did not use herbs to make medicine. He used no portions of anything. He just healed the guy. Probably just spoke and healed the guy. So it could be argued that Jesus did not do work on the Sabbath because he did not mix up anything or make anything or apply anything. He just probably spoke and gave this man healing. The point is that Jesus here wanted them to see the man. He called the man out, stand here, and then he asked the question to the whole congregation because he wanted everybody. He wanted the Pharisees. He wanted the other church members. And he wanted us to literally see the man. Not look through the man, but see the person. See the man. The Pharisees did not see the man. They just saw him as an illustration of their rules and regulations. They just saw him as a means to argue with Jesus. They did not see him and his needs. They just saw him as some prop that they can use to bring about their cause. But Jesus saw the humanity. He saw a person in need. And this is what he wants us to see. People that have needs. Jesus saw the man, and he had compassion on the man by healing him. He saw that he could do something good for somebody, and he took the opportunity, and he did it. But as the saying goes, all good things comes to an end. Verse 11, but they were filled with rage and discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. The word fury, it comes from the Greek word annoia, as in being annoyed. And it literally means mindless, thus inferring that the Pharisees' rage was irrational. Fury, irrational, mindless. The King James puts it, filled with madness. Why are they so mad? Something wonderful is taking place in their midst. And this is the sad thing about all of this. This is a sad story for several reasons. First, they never saw the man. They just saw him as an illustration of their theological argument. And second, their reaction was tragic because they themselves know that all healing, all miracles come from God. These Pharisees know where the healing comes from. John chapter 3, verse 1 and 2. There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. This man came to Jesus by night and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. The Pharisees know that all miracles come from God. They saw a miracle, and yet they are filled with rage. The Pharisees are so intent on keeping the Sabbath that they won't even allow God, the God they serve, they won't even allow God to act on the Sabbath day what he instituted. They won't even let God himself go against their man-made traditions of the Sabbath. But the worst part of this verse It's what they decide to do with Jesus. Because that's the thing. Each and every one of us have to do something with Jesus. Jesus is not going to go away. You have to do something with Jesus. And what they chose to do here, they discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. In other words, they're plotting to kill Jesus. In effect, their reaction here answers Jesus' question in verse 9. In asking the question, they indicate that there are only two options. And here the Pharisees are displaying the truth of that. By not applying themselves and being on Jesus' side and being thankful and grateful for the miracle, in the end, they end up plotting evil. By not doing good, when they had the opportunity to do good, what they end up doing is evil. See, they couldn't save a life on the Sabbath, but they can plot to kill someone on the Sabbath. How does that equate? When we see good to do and we don't do it, it's just the same as doing evil, because indirectly you're supporting the evil intent. This is the point Jesus is making, and this is what plays out right here. You see, when people get legalistic about the law, this is exactly what happens. This is why we don't like people getting legalistic in church. And this is the reason why we as a church, we sometimes override our own rules when the need arises. Because a rule was given to guide. That's why we have rules, to guide us. It's not to dominate us, to guide us. And when we are so strict on our rules, we end up going in the opposite direction to what God intended. See, God never gave us the law for it to dominate us in such a way that we can't have our needs met. The law was given as a guide. It was a guide to help us to love God and love other people. Jesus lets us know that the law can be summarized in one word: love. You love God and love other people, and by doing so, you fulfill the entire law. That's the purpose of the law, to enable us to love God and love people. See people's needs and willing to act to help. When I look at this lesson and I see that there's somebody among the brethren in need, and nobody was willing to stand up and speak out for this individual, that is a sad church. So the question is left here in my mind is, what can you do for your fellowship? Think about it.